Well, hello, internet friends, and welcome to episode number 128 of Final Boss TV, your wild game rating show. I'm your host. My name is Adam K, aka Bay, and today's show is Protection Warriors. So next week should be the Exorcist World First interview, and then a Sunday or two after that will be the Lost Codex interview with the boys behind the Lost Codex YouTube. And then the next spec show will be, I don't know, it'll be something. We'll figure it out when we get there, okay? Just hold your horses. But real quick, I want to make sure that I shout out the assistant producers of the show, Troffles, Ludovicus, and Tazelin, and all the others that have been supporting the show recently and the growing support on the Patreon page. I want to plug this at the beginning of the show to make sure no one forgets about it. There are new podcasts. Essentially, there are BTS podcasts that are recorded with the guests sort of before these shows start now that are only available to patrons of the show. If you'd like more show, then it exists. Details, of course, on the Patreon page. And the one for episode 128 will go up like today. They're about an hour long. It's us setting up the show, meeting the guests for the first time, talking to that stuff and things. But today's guests are, and those that you can hear more about on the behind the scenes podcasts. Here's a guy that name is not spelt the way it's said, which is fine. Marok, welcome to the show, sir. Hello.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Are you ready to talk about Protection Warrior?
Yes, I am.
Are you sure?
I'm excited.
Yeah?
I'm sure. Absolutely sure. Yes.
I'm gonna save your little blippy point here and why this, as Chad is seeing the picture of your warrior and this helmet is so iconic for you. We'll save that for a little bit. Let's introduce Macro first. Who's over here? Hi, Macro. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Are you ready to also talk about Protection Warrior?
Well, I hope so. I mean, you know, it'd be a little bit awkward if I wasn't, so I think I'll be all right.
You think you'll be all right? I mean, right now you're kind of cheating on the class, though. It's just,
It is true that I'm not actually maining a warrior right now, but I assure you it's nothing to do with my feelings towards warriors. I decided to main a druid before we all knew that they were horrendously overpowered this expansion, so that's how it is.
That's very true. And we'll get into more of that, of course, later, but both of these gentlemen are responsible for quite a bit of the work that goes through on the Discord side and the guide writing and all that good stuff. So, now it's story time. Marok, first off, tell us about the whole helmet thing with you, and then why should anyone listen to what you have to say about Protection Warrior? What do you do in the community, sir?
So the helmet thing, I've had this translogs from like it's the green heroic tier from BRF, and I've been using it for like 2 years now or whatever. And someone in Warrior Discord made an emote with my helmet with a bunch of question marks around it. And it's just like, I don't know, it's my face now, I guess, for some reason, is that helmet.
You know, that's why you're not actually on camera right now, because you are just like, you have to take the helmet off to talk into your mic, because otherwise the helmet's always on in real life, right? Is that what?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, okay, fair enough. Yeah, you'll notice on the 4 camera, your helmet's off, but you're just yelling and screaming, so it's okay. Your little dwarf is off.
That sounds like him, yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. But then, and what do you do with the Warrior community then?
So I'm the owner of the Warrior Discord. I didn't make it, but I was given ownership about 9 months ago. Okay. So I do that kind of stuff. Do a lot of theory crafting for prod with macro, stat priorities, rotations, stuff like that. We both work on the guide that's posted on MMO Champion. Let's see what else is there. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of it. We just do it, everything prod related, basically.
So I have, and I'll be bringing up on the show as I go through here, that we do have, like, I'll reference the Icy Veins guide, which we found out, like, yesterday. There's still parts of it that aren't totally accurate there. So would you say that to point people in the direction? I mean, I use it for like the tooltips and the pop-ups and whatever to hover over stuff. But would you say that the MMO champion protection warrior guide right now is the one that's like the most up to date to point players towards?
Yes. I wouldn't recommend reading the Iceman's Guide. I mean, it's not completely wrong. There's some things that aren't accurate, but we have direct control basically over what goes in the MMO guide, and I definitely recommend reading that one first.
Sure. That sounds fair. I was going to pull that up. I don't think I have the link to it anymore. Oh, we'll find it. So we'll go from there. And then, Macro, what about you? What do you do in the same realm for the Prot Warrior community?
So I am quite active amongst other Discords. Skyhold is one of the ones that I'm the most active in. We do a lot of theory crafting in terms of optimal ways to play with certain talents, for example. I write guides about how to do certain things, and also maybe which trinkets to use, that kind of thing. Quick shout out to my guild, Azys, who just killed Spellblader L'Oreal on Mythic, so good job, guys.
Without you? Or with you?
Without me.
Oh, oh no.
I'm not raiding Mythic right now because of real life commitments, unfortunately. But yeah, good job, guys.
Very good. How about any shout outs to, like, who... People always ask me about this, and this is the first, and as we'll get into the Sword and Board 101 here, that you're the first spec class show up that is for tanking in Legion. But I always get asked about Simulation Craft because I play a DPS. And Simulation Craft doesn't really work for tanking. So is that because it's something that's more that they're breakpoints and stats or whatever? Or like how would you suggest getting around that SimCraft doesn't really work for tanking? Do you guys have like figured out all that kind of stuff written again in the MMO guide, and who figures that kind of stuff out?
SimCraft does work for tanking. You just have to know how to use it, and it also depends on how well supported your spec is. So, for example, for Prot in particular, Collision, he does the majority of the work on the protection module for SimCraft, and I've been working closely with him to try to get all the bugs worked out. It was basically unusable up until a few weeks ago. There's still some bugs left, but it is usable. You know, for DPS purposes, you can just import your character and, you know, get weights from that if you wanted to.
Although it's important to recognize that the default APL is not optimized for DPS, and you absolutely should use a custom one if you're trying to get DPS weights.
Yeah, but for finding like survivability stat weights, you can't just sim yourself. You can do it. It's just really complicated and like not worth trying to figure out on your own, pretty much.
Well, I guess
the reason for that is
go ahead.
The reason for that is because if you're simming for DPS, then when you sim is A or B better for DPS, you get DPS as a result, and you look at which one's higher. But for survivability, you don't get a survivability result. You get things like damage taken per second and TMI, which, as many people watching will know, is a metric designed to show you how spiky your health is. But obviously both of those things are important for survivability, and combining the two is an arduous and imprecise process. And you can't just put things into SimCraft and get a number as a result for survivability. And that's why we recommend that people don't use simulators for survivability.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I guess it was brought up in chat, and I think we went over this sort of in the setup for the show, and I think you have a note about it. Is like Greyhound says that I heard Simulation Craft doesn't work for tanks, as we just went over.
Please don't read anything that Greyhound says.
But yeah.
Just trolling us.
But Ask Mr. Robot is also another possibility. Does that work?
It works in the sense that it will sim your character and like do your rotation. However, the metric that they give for tank survivability, called NPS, isn't very accurate, and I wouldn't recommend using it for that purpose.
Okay.
I mean, I'm sure the simulator works. If there are any bugs, they're bugs that can be fixed, and if there are any bugs, I don't know about them. I'm sure that the simulator works in order to tell you what your NPS is, and then whether or not NPS is a useful metric for survivability is obviously a matter for debate, as is DTPS and TMI, etc. I'd personally recommend that people don't use simulators, at least any that we currently have available for survivability.
What is because I don't tank. What does NPS stand for? What is this new nonsense?
Nopes per second.
Oh,
It's basically like Azys Robot's thought process behind that was like if you're reducing damage, it's a nope. So they measure it in nopes per second.
It's definitely an interesting idea, and I do think it has some advantages over existing metrics. But on the whole, I don't think it's necessarily a good way of getting, for example, stat weights for survivability. I don't think I'd recommend using that.
okay. Well, this leads into like the Sword and Board 101, your general thoughts and feelings about protection warriors, and then I guess tanking right now in Legion. So I want to open up with that to sort of set the playing field here for what you guys think of just tank balance right now overall in the game. So, I mean, what are your thoughts so far? I mean, we know that Macro is at least playing Guardian right now, and then Prot Warrior, and then Marok's only playing Prot Warrior, but I imagine no tank only plays and has one tank, right? Not everyone has all of them.
Not on a high level at least.
Right. But, I mean, what do you think? I don't know, Marok, what do you think so far of, like, the tanking balance? Like, who's your co-tank? Like, how does that work out for you? Are there any specific, like, outliers or issues right now, other than Brewmasters and Guardians being wicked overpowered still? But what do you think?
Well, there's no tank right now that you just can't play. None of them are that bad. Obviously, there are some that are stronger than others, like Baron, Brewmaster. They're definitely far and away the best tanks right now. Prod is in a good place currently. We're pretty strong. Do good damage, have good survivability. Better than DKs and DHs, but worse than monks and bears. But overall tank balance, I feel like it's just been getting better. This tier in particular, maybe it's not that great just because of how the disparity between the top tanks and the bottom end tanks. But again, there's nothing that you just can't play because it's so bad.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I would say that I think the tank balance right now is not great. It's definitely been better in the past, but it's certainly not as bad as it has been sometimes in the past. I would say that it's absolutely the case that if you're dying on progression, it's not because of your class, it's because you're doing something wrong or because somebody else in your raid is doing something wrong, or both. However, that said, there are certainly tanks where it will be easier to survive on one class rather than another. So, for example, on a Brewmaster Monk or a Guardian Druid, you'll probably have an easier time of it than on, for example, a Blood Death Knight. I think that Prot Warrior is probably somewhere in the middle with regard to that in particular. However, if you're playing well, then really nothing should present an issue.
Fair enough. There's a weird back and forth, and this gets kind of nitty-gritty, because take part of the reason why, and so that chat sort of understands this a little bit more, is that Guardian Druid and Brewmaster Monk, their way of tanking, right? Like Mark of Ursal and Iron Fur, like their preventative measures, like their normal rotational stuff, those are totally outside of what, like a Prot Warrior, you have either you can do damage or you have to convert all your rage to surviving. Whereas Guardian and Brewmaster, they're both just on like charges and cooldowns. So that becomes part of one of the issues that I think I've talked about before. But what? Yeah, go for it.
So are you saying that Guardian and Brewmaster don't lose DPS for survivability?
They don't have to compete with. I think I was talking to my tank about this too, and Mass was in the notes, and I think he posted some stuff here too for it. But the survivability aspects of Guardian and Brewmaster and why they've suddenly risen so high is because they don't have to compete with what they would normally do. Like your brews are just on charges. And
right. I don't agree with that.
Okay.
So there's a particular talent for Protection Warrior called Vengeance, which I'm sure we'll get into in a bit more detail later. But if you're taking Vengeance, which you almost certainly would be in all situations when you needed some survivability, that is allowing you to do your DPS rotation without losing any survivability. However, I don't think that what you said is necessarily the case for Brewmaster or Guardian, because although Guardian gets a very minor DPS increase from spending Rage on more rather than on Iron Fur and Marcoversal, it also gains significant DPS by doing something called Cat Weaving, which is a significant survivability loss in certain circumstances.
Oh, sure, right.
It also, with Brewmaster, there are different rotations you can do to maximize your DPS, which are certainly significant survivability losses, but of course if you've already got enough survivability, it may be worth doing that anyway. But I wouldn't say that that's necessarily true for Prot Warrior, largely because of the Vengeance talent. But obviously if you don't need survivability, then Vengeance is a waste, and you could go with a different talent and then you could get even more DPS.
Fair enough. Yeah, that's just like, that's the counter to why everyone thinks that like everyone needs to play Brewmaster or Guardian right now. So that's why I was bringing that up. And then of course the new kid on the block. How are Vengeance Demon Hunters working out? I don't know if either of you have dabbled on them, but a lot of my stuff I do tanking with one of my subs. He plays Vengeance, it just seems fine. They definitely got some much needed buffs in 7.15 recently with the armor and the demon spikes change, so that was helpful. But I don't know. What do you guys both think of Vengeance? If you've dabbled in or tanked with a Demon Hunter before?
I haven't played a Vengeance Demon Hunter, but my co-tank is currently a bear, and he had wanted to main swap to a Demon Hunter at some point. I mean, they're fine. Like they're not terrible or anything, but you know, you look at a bear and you look at what a Vengeance Demon Hunter can do, and just bear's just better in almost every way. But again, they're fine. Like you can, if you want to play one, you can. So
fair enough.
And I think it's true that the ceiling in terms of what you can achieve for both is probably extremely close together. Perhaps Bear would be slightly stronger. However, if you're looking to get to a specific point rather than the best you possibly can get, and that specific point being good enough to kill the boss, you probably will get to that point with considerably less investment with Guardian Druid or Brewmaster Monk than with Vengeance Demon Hunter.
Yeah, and that's sort of the other turnaround point too, is that handling Frenzied Regen reactively and then Mark of Ursal or Iron Fur is quite a bit easier than timing Soul Carve or Cleaves or also Demon Spike uptime and also doing your DPS rotation and sigils, and like there's a back and forth, because I've done some tanking. My ult is a Havoc Demon Hunter, so I've tanked a little bit on Vengeance, nothing like crazy, just flat mythics and whatnot, but it does seem like there are like overloads in Vengeance's like kit, whereas other tanks are much, I mean, they've had more time to be developed, right? They're more streamlined. They have less bumps in the road to get to where you need to go to tank certain things. So it feels that's what Mass said too about, he says he feels so like cruise control on his bear, but on his warrior, he feels like he has to juggle plates a lot more often, which I guess is just how the tanks have shaken up. So
yeah, I'd agree with that. Like if you fall behind, you know, as prod, it can be hard to, I guess, catch back up, you know, in terms of mitigation. So you know, if you're not constantly pressing your buttons, you're probably going to die. Whereas bear, that might not be true.
So how about, that leads me into like the do's and don'ts. What would you say are like little nuggets you've picked up along your travels with tanking so far in Legion? And it's kind of general overview kind of stuff. Like what would you say are huge things to denote for tanks, and then things like to not do? What are your thumbs up and thumbs downs? Yeah, go ahead.
Something to note for a tank as opposed to other specs is you have to actually pay attention to what's going on. And that's all you have to do, really. Because unlike for a DPS spec where really you have to be, you know, in order to, so you could DPS and you could be terrible at your class and you could be barely paying attention to what's going on and you'd do terrible DPS, but you wouldn't necessarily wipe the raid from that depending on whether or not your DPS was needed. Obviously, in order to be a productive member of the raid, you'd want to be doing as best as you can, and you need to be doing as much DPS as you want to do. So you need to like watch your rotation. You need to make sure that you're playing properly. For a tank, honestly, you can get away with not doing that most of the time. And whilst it's not ideal for your raid, obviously the ideal situation is that you're doing everything perfectly. It's not ideal if you're screwing up your rotation, but you can probably get away with doing that and without causing raid wipes, even if without being close to dying, as long as you're really on top of all the raid mechanics. Tanks sometimes die because they're doing their rotations terribly. Usually, if they're doing their rotations terribly, the only real issues it gives you is threat issues, and even then, often not really. However, the most important thing, and the thing that kills tanks all the time, is when they screw up boss mechanics. Like they forget to taunt at the right time, or they do it wrong. They taunt the wrong time. They taunt 3 seconds too late because I don't know, they were sitting on their hands, and the other tank dies, and they wipe the raid, and it's your fault because you weren't paying attention. And absolutely, the number one thing to do as a tank is to pay attention.
Fair enough. And at the same time, because the bar sort of definitely raises, is that we'll get into more of that on the next little point, but you have to make sure you're not only contributing, because tank DPS definitely does matter, but then also mitigating properly, taunt swapping properly, boss movement or positioning if it's a movable boss, unlike one like Croesus that doesn't move, or Star Augur, for example. But I mean, there are definitely a lot of little things that definitely make sense in there. What about you? What do you think, Marok?
I think Macro covered the important thing, and just doing mechanics is the most important thing. I guess this is a little bit of a different topic, but in terms of what you can do to help you with tanking, is getting a good add-on for nameplates, just so you can see what targets are out there and things like that. I see a lot of tanks they have enemy nameplates turned off, and that's really dumb. You need them, and they're really helpful. So I think having a good UI in general is actually extremely helpful when it comes to tanking.
Which is amusing because, as many people watching this will know, I have an awful UI. But, as long as it's functional.
That's kind of counterproductive. So what you're saying is not Sco's UI.
Exactly, yes.
Poor Scott. God, it's gotten better, but man, as long as I've known that boy, holy crap, his UI has always been just so cluttery and just stuff everywhere. But maybe it works for him. He's used to it, I guess, so that's fair. People want you to show it. Macro's UI is awful. Nightmare UI, indeed, can confirm. Oh, God. Chat is all about this right now.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah. It's slightly better now, but it's pretty terrible.
That's pretty good. Transitioning over to Mythic Plus, which is a huge point of and part of the game right now. There's a little website that I want to make sure you all are aware of. It's called mythicpl.us. So it's Mythic Plus, but it's just Mythic Plus with a dot before the U and the S. That goes over all of the affixes and everything else. Goes over, where everything falls. Of course, updating when the new... Remember, in 7.2, we're getting new affixes and stuff like that. There's also all the different completion times, all the different loot eye levels, etc., useful stuff, add-ons, weak auras, other stuff, all this on mythicpl.us. But I wanted to bring up, because last week was, man, next week is the best week for US. I can't wait. Sanguine, Volcanic, Fortified, sign me up. But I wanted to ask what you thought, and I'll go over to Marok first. Why you love, Necrotic so much, and what do you think about the Mythic Plus system for tanks, and how affixes change how you tackle each different dungeon? Anything you want to denote with Mythic Plus?
Necrotic, when the expansion first came out, Necrotic was awful, and I would log on, do my 10, and then never touch Mythic Plus for the rest of the week just because I hated dealing with it. But now that DPS is so high, and you can just run through Mythic dungeons so easily, Necrotic isn't that bad, because by the time you need to kite or clear your stacks, everything's dead, so it's not really that big of a deal.
Sure.
Well, maybe that's true if you're running Mythic Plus 4s like Marok, but sometimes it can be...
even at high levels, like if you're running 10s or 12s, it's not that bad. Not as bad as it used to be, of course.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. One thing that's made Necrotic in particular considerably easier which came out recently, is the trinket Fang of Tichondrius from Tichondrius and the Nighthold. If you can manage to get a hold on one of those, that makes necrotic a joke compared to what it normally is, because leech healing is not reduced by necrotic, unlike a lot of forms of healing. And that trinket allows you to have about 20% leech if you're a tank. It's I think it's half rate if you're not a tank. If you're a tank, it's about 20% leech and like 1/5 uptime, and it's pretty great. It's really strong. It means that you can just keep tanking for an extra 12 seconds, not worrying about your debuff.
Well, doesn't necrotic only reduce healing you receive, right? Not healing you do to yourself regardless. So yeah, that would be a huge.
No, it does affect healing that you do by
like
yourself, but not leech. So it does affect, for example, Friends in Regeneration. It does affect Ignore Pain because it also affects Absorbs, but it doesn't affect leech specifically.
Wow. Okay. So grab one of those, because that was as our gaming culture has evolved, the word meme now means so many more things, but that was the first, when we first killed Tichondrius on Heroic during splits, when it first came out, we were like, what is this trinket? But it's funny how you bring that up to make sure that people know, is that it is really strong, because you can pull a whole ton of mobs and then you pop the trinket to get all that leech, and then you will, obviously you'll be AoE or cleaving and whatnot, and you gain all that healing to keep yourself alive and not worrying about your 20, 30, 40 stacks. To a degree. Don't go too crazy on that, but...
Well, actually, I wouldn't necessarily agree with that.
Oh? Can you go crazy?
The dot itself does no damage. It does completely insignificant damage. It's never going to kill you.
Okay.
And the only thing is, once you're above 33 stacks, you can't be healed by anything other than leech. So once you're above 33 stacks, as long as you're not on like 150, the dot's damage is completely inconsequential, and I wouldn't worry about it at all. There's below 33 stacks where the amount of healing reduction matters, and above 33 stacks, it's basically all the same.
I see. But yeah, the word of the wise there is grab that trinket if you can, essentially.
Absolutely.
For necrotic weeks. Yeah.
Really strong. Can I just pick you up on something that a couple of people in chat said earlier? Did you say that tank DPS does matter, or that tank DPS doesn't matter?
No, I said does matter.
Right. Okay.
Absolutely,
just
it does.
I think some people heard it as doesn't.
No, does. I mean, you can argue that depending on the encounter, the tank's mechanics and them surviving matters more than them doing damage. But when you add up you and your co-tank, you are essentially a 0.5 or almost like a 0.75 extra DPS in the course of the raid.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So that's important, right? And then you add up your 3 or 4 healers, and they add up to be about 1 to 1.5 DPS, depending on if you have a bunch of holy paladins that are going ham doing 250k. So yeah, no, it all those your healers and your tanks from like a DPS standpoint, you have to add those together, but those make that you're DPSing a boss with 15, 16 DPS, not just the 14 or whatever you're normally running with. So like that it definitely matters. Especially Mythic Plus, for example. Tanks do so much damage in Mythic Plus, technically, because normally you're pulling like 8, 10, 12 mobs or whatever, depending on what the affixes are. So Guardian Druid pulls half of DHT and bleeds it all down with Thrash. So yeah, it's totally worth it. Yeah, absolutely matters. How about a bit of bants about Nighthold? What do you guys think of the raid instance so far from what you've seen? Marok's ahead of me in progression, so Marok, I'll toss it over to you.
It's better than EN. I'll give it that.
Well, okay.
No, but I like it. I think it's a fun raid. There's no fight in particular that I just hate. I think all the fights are pretty fun. It's a good raid, and tuning-wise, it's good too. Spellblade probably was a little bit overtuned for the position in the raid that it was, but
it has overall been nerfed as well.
Yeah, right, and it's been nerfed. At first it was overtuned, but yeah, it's a good raid. I like it a lot.
Fair enough.
I'd agree. I think that it's fairly tuned. I don't think Spellblade necessarily needed a nerf. I think obviously people can just go to 3 of the other bosses first, and I think it's fine that it's difficult. Obviously you've got some of the significantly easier bosses earlier on, like Scorpion. Nobody really struggles in Scorpion. If you do, should probably sit and have a think about that. When you've got up to Trilliax, people normally don't struggle too much. After that, then there's a step up in difficulty if you go to something other than Spellblade first. And then there's another step up when you get to Spellblade, although that may or may not be the case now after Spellblade has been nerfed. I think it's fine because you've got some easy bosses at the start, you've got some more difficult bosses in the middle, and then you've got significantly harder ones at the end. And I think that's a good thing when you've got a raid of 10 bosses. I think it's quite well done on difficulty.
They definitely...
And in
Oh, no, go ahead.
And in terms of enjoyment of the raid, I think it's a really well-designed raid. There's lots of interesting mechanics, more so for DPS, I think, than for tanks. But there have been worse tank fights in the game. At least nothing's Iron Raven.
Well,
yeah, that's true. For tanks, I think tanks in particular, Nighthold is a little on the boring side, just in terms of mechanics. It's a lot of just taunt it, this number of stacks or stand in this. So it's not that interesting in that regard, but it's still fun. I still enjoy it.
Yeah. And there's nothing that makes me actively want to be benched for that particular fight, like on Iron Raven in particular.
Yeah.
I suppose. I think from an outside looking in, the best tank mechanic fight might be on Star Augur, because you interact with the room, at least. Like, you interact with your raiders, then you interact with the room. Like, it's totally on you to clear the Fel, and it's totally on you to make sure you clear your Frosty buffs like your 3 different groups, right? Like, that's pretty neat. Opposed to Croesus, which is just, stand in the circle and taunt swap at 4.
It is unique, but I have to say it's probably my least favorite fight in the raid.
Really?
Yeah, I just don't enjoy the whole, pull mechanic with the meteor and stuff like that, but it's not bad. It's just I just don't find it particularly enjoyable.
Interesting. I know when we were Mass got lucky enough to have the shoulders, the heroic leap shoulders, so he actually just bounces out and then bounces over and then bounces back to the boss with the debuffs now just on farm, because it's just really, really funny. But I don't know, I thought that again, as a DPS looking at it, looks a lot more that it's something more to do than just taunt swap recursive strikes or taunt swap Croesus debuff or whatnot. But sounds good to me. How about actually getting into now for a few minutes, since we sort of weave that in there, the actual topic of tank DPS. So I guess, is there a hierarchy that you have seen in which tanks sort of who does the most damage, and then who does the middle ground, and who does the least? I think Blood DK might be a little bit but what do you guys think for the tank damage point that right now we're seeing? What do you see as the top damage to bottom damage, or what have you seen from your side, Macro?
Well, I'm not sure that it's necessarily useful to discuss in the sense that people can always look at statistics on Warcraft logs if they like.
Right.
Obviously, there are differences in what's relevant. So, for example, Druid does significantly less DPS when it's not cat weaving, and lots of people don't cat weave on progress because they're lazy.
Wow.
Looking at the certain people listening know who they are. I would say that Prot Warrior, which is obviously the thing that we're here to talk about, Prot Warrior does very good damage right now, even when you're spec'd for full survivability. It actually did so good damage that it needed a nerf 1 week after 7.1.5 came out.
Yep.
Well, it does very good damage even when it's fully survivability spec'd, and even though it's true that it may be more difficult to play Prot Warrior for survivability to meet that instead of Guardian Druid or Brewmaster Monk, they're still perfectly fine for survivability, and you can still do great DPS without gimping your survivability, and that's good.
Fair enough. What do you think, Marok?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think in terms of actual balance, tank DPS is fine. Blood DKs are a little on the low side. They probably could use a buff, but before the nerf, after 7.1.5 came out, we were definitely overpowered in terms of damage. With Devastator, on some fights, I was pulling as much DPS as our bottom DPS, and it was just insane. And then, of course, we got nerfed. But after the nerfs and balancing, tank damage is in a good spot.
Yeah, there was... It's a weird subject whenever you usually bring this up. That's why I'll make sure it always matters. But there's definitely a balancing tipping point when when it comes to like patchwork DPS is normally where this becomes a thing, because again, like most tanks have and have to in their kit have a lot of tools to deal with AoE, because they AoE tank trash in dungeons. That's kind of how it works. But when you're on patchwork style fights, and then when your tank damage is, like you just suggested, like better or at the same level as your weakest DPS in your raid, which then it becomes like our tank's doing too much damage.
But you're not if you're roughly similar gear and skill. If you're doing the same DPS as someone who is like the lowest DPS in your raid, then like either they died or they're really bad at the game, or they're significantly undergeared compared to you. Like that doesn't happen. Tanks are not so strong that you're as strong as the weakest DPS. And if you look at Warcraft logs statistics at the same percentile for, or even if you look at like 100th percentile for tanks, or maybe 99th, compared to 90th for DPS, and you look at the worst DPS spec, they'll still be enormously further ahead of all the tanks, because if your tanks are doing as much DPS as your DPS, that DPS is not playing properly in one way or another, or they're like 30 item numbers lower or something.
No, absolutely. And that's the thing. I mean, I think there at the start of the expansion, there definitely was like the full DPS, like Protection Paladin, which Protection Paladins had a stint in Warlords where the same thing happened, where they were just doing way too much damage. So they got, a little bit of a chip back. Because I think Blizzard kind of wants when that 70 to 75% of an actual DPS. So it's not insignificant damage, right? And that's why you add your two tanks together, as most fights are two tanked. And you get about just a little over a regular damage dealing class. So, but that's fair.
If tanks ever consistently do as much damage as a damage dealer, then that's definitely a problem, and they would need to be nerfed.
Yeah, that's fair. As long as
because at that point you might as well just bring more tanks, because they're tankier, and then obviously just do the same damage, which would be just dumb.
Sure.
And it has historically been different. So, for example, in Siege of Orgrimmar, tanks could quite easily often be the top DPS on certain fights, like in Garrosh. If you're solo tanking, you'd often be the top DPS. But it wasn't the case that you just stack tanks, because you needed to rely on the mechanic Vengeance to do that. I think it's probably a good thing for the game that Vengeance has gone, because it was insane. But I did enjoy abusing it. So,
Well, I remember us having to abuse Vengeance on Heroic Lei Shen progression. Your tank would sit down on the pole to get slapped in the back of the head for a crit to stack their Vengeance up, because you needed their damage to help you push the phases, because they're always attacking the boss. So their overall damage just added up to be really, really important. But yeah, I'll agree.
That's where you bugged Vengeance, and less than 0.1 second before you took a hit, you would use a defensive cooldown, and then you'd get the effect of the Vengeance as if it hadn't been damage reduced.
That was a lot of nonsense back then, for sure. But
yeah.
How about change of pace real quick here? I'm going to bring up on screen something really ridiculous. How about your tier 20 armor? Ooh, boy. I'm bringing up the mythic one right now on the 3D model viewer. But if those of you don't know, that the gear coming from Tomb of Sargeras in the future is all sort of based on Black Temple, tier 6. And this is the new warrior armor.
It reminds me. Sorry.
Oh, no, it just looks really, really good. But it reminds you of what? Go ahead.
There's an NPC, I can't remember his name, who you rescue him from when you're doing the shipyard campaign.
Right.
And he's an orc, and you rescue him, and you grapple up to a building, and he says, "This is why we cover all our buildings in spikes," and that's what that reminds me of.
It is a impressive looking set. It's one of my favorite top 5, just because the biggest thing I brought up the regular heroic one, I think right now, the biggest thing you're noticing with the new armor sets and the way that WoW is evolving graphically is just the thickness of the armor. You have hit plates now, and different levels of armor. Your gloves have a hand brace on top of the glove. So the thickness of the armor, and it's just 3D nature. It's not all just flat painted texture anymore. Your chest is just flat textures on the normal one, but it is really, really impressive how far the armor modeling has come. But yeah, the tier 20 looks really impressive. Marok, what do you... Are you going to actually change?
Probably not. I'll keep my green helmet.
But there's
I like it too much.
There is a green set of tier 20. You can put your helmet on top of that, but wear the rest of the tier 20. See?
That's true. I could. I might. Probably not, but I might.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, in Legion they added, all that new technology to add 3D models on top of, just like the base armor model. So you get all those like really cool 3D effects, like you have those swinging things on belts or you have spikes on boots and stuff like that. It makes armor look way better.
No, it definitely does. Like just like the actually, let me go real quick here to the MMO Champion. They have a poll down here. Oh, you know what? Actually, I'll put this on screen. I just voted again on Shaman, I think for the first time, or again, I don't know. But yeah, so out of all the votes real quick here on MMO Champions thread, Warrior is winning at 24.6%, Warlock at 19, Priest at 14.4, Paladin's down there, and Shaman, the Monk. The most unlike set is Death Knight. Wow. That's crazy. These can all be found, if you are curious, right here on the top of MMO Champion when you're on the homepage. Let me bounce over that real quick. Here, go to 7.2, and then click on Tier 20 Armor Sets right there at the top. And there's some Final Boss Inception, because I'm on the front page right now. But go to patch 7.2 and go to Tier 20 Armor Sets. And then you get all the armor sets, and then you click on Model Viewer to get the 3D of them. So they're all right there for you if you haven't seen them. And go vote. What do you think? What's your favorite armor set? Because that's actually funny that Warrior is winning. I didn't know that until I clicked the button. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. What were you trying to post? Oh, what's this? What's that? Oh. You made a straw poll. Does Marok need a new transmog?
No, say no, please.
Here, I'll post it again. Here, there you go, chat. Does Marok need a new transmog? Go for it. I'm gonna vote on that right now too, but I'm not gonna tell you what I voted. Go vote, chat. Go vote.
You linked the wrong thing. That's
You
something
linked-
else.
What?
Not in English.
What the hell is that?
You missed a few numbers on the end.
Oh, there's a few. Whoa, that's weird. That's really strange. Why did I clicked on your link and just copied it?
Yeah, you missed part of it.
New poll available. Oh, there it goes. Now it'll pop up in chat because Twitch grabs it. Okay, cool. Why the hell? That's weird. I clicked on your link to vote and then I copy and pasted. Oh well. There we go.
I'm the only one who voted no.
Let me see.
Oh no, there's 8 votes for no now. Thanks guys, whoever those 8 people are.
9 votes for no so far. 10 votes for no. So many votes for yes.
Come on, my transmog's great.
Well, you can wear tier 20 again. Just put your green helmet on.
That's true. Yeah. The mythic
terrible.
tier 20 set does look really, really good. So I might use that one day.
Fair enough. How long did you make this straw poll last for? Because I'll put it in the YouTube section. We'll get some more votes.
I didn't put a timer on it.
Okay, fair enough. But anything else in the general tanking sword and board 101 section that you want to go over that we may have skipped before we move on? Anything else? What do you think? Because you guys have your own notes section. I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
Oh, well, there's lots that we'll get to later. But I just want to say one thing now. If you're a prot warrior and you're losing threat to a guardian druid, if a guardian druid is losing threat to you, rather.
Oh God.
They're doing it wrong. It's not your fault. It's okay. It's their fault. Tell them to play better. Okay, that's all I wanted to say.
Oh.
Yeah, threat issues with warriors and bears is an interesting topic, to say the least.
Yeah. It comes up a lot.
Yeah.
And it's their fault for losing threat.
I mean, threat issues happen right now. I definitely know that Mass pulls aggro when he doesn't mean to over our prot paladin. So I don't know if that's just there. I mean, prot warriors do burst some significant threat. So
yeah, if you start a fight and you pop battle cry, you have your potions running and everything with hero, and you're running Devastator, you'll probably rip off your co-tank. You just do an insane amount of burst damage when all of that's up. So
yeah, but other than on pull, then
yeah.
All right, fair enough. Well, alrighty then. Well, I'm going to move us along real quick here for a little mid-show break and plug a few things. I will again, of course, plug and thank the support for the show that's growing on our Patreon page. And again, if you missed the beginning of the show, You get to see the show notes if you'd like to follow along with the show notes on Patreon as well. And there are more podcasts. If you want more of the discussions between myself and the guests every week, this is a new thing that's happening now for the rare tier or epic tier, and higher, the $5 or more. You basically get another podcast. These are the BTS recordings that happen in the meet and greet section. So there's one for hunters. We started with hunters, right? So Azratharian and we sat down when we talked about everything. So you can go check that out. Obviously, all the shows post there. But when Azur and Fi and I talked, or when Keen and Can I Be Heels talked, these are all there. And then, of course, the one for this show will be posted very soon. Additionally, in chat, you will find a command, also a link below the stream, that is the guide, the channel guide. This has all the links to all the different Discord servers for every single spec and parts of the game. There's 2 for Demon Hunters, because reasons. But then there's the tank chat, general hospital, a link to the general chat for the Final Boss TV. If you want to ask questions for upcoming shows, the way to do so now is to be in my Discord channel. You have access to talk in the general chat. If you're not a subscriber to the show, then you can just ask in those sections if you want to get in touch with me for any reason. Or a day or two before each show, I always boop that channel and ask if you have any questions for the upcoming show. So you can just join the Discord server right there and jump in. But all the different resources on the side here, the stream schedule, again, the Mythic website is down here as well. So all the different resources and things, if you have curiosities, are all in the channel guide. And then, of course, because it's happening again, because Gul'dan is defeated, we don't have anything to show yet for the next World First shirt design. Like we had the Mythic Exorcist World First Xavius shirt for Exorcist. We had the ones for Method in the last expansion. The new Gul'dan one is on its way. Again, the Exorcist interview should be, unless there's some scheduling problems that suddenly arise, next Sunday. And I'll have something to show off on there. But if you want to support the show in a different way, we have all the things. And the colors and the stuff. But you can go pick and choose different apparel, hoodies, sweatshirts, tank tops, etc. with the different things and designs that you would like. I'm surprised that Little Arthas is still the top. The top leftmost item is always the most popular one, but that Little Arthas is killing it. Those shirts by Fabelina are too good. But thank you all those that did support the show in the different ways. And again, when the Exorcist shirt comes out, we're going to stylize it a lot more, so it just looks like a fantasy shirt. We went a little bit toward that regard with the new one, because you really can't tell that it's not like a World of Warcraft shirt. The Method ones are different artists that you definitely can, but we're trying out some different things on that one, so hopefully I get to show you something next week. But that'll be awesome. But that's it for me to blurb about. You guys ready to dive into talents and things?
Sure.
Yep.
All right. Well, let's bring that screen over here, and we will start the meat and potatoes for Protection Warrior. So there was obviously a change in prot from launch to 715. And overall, how are the new changes working out? You've lost, the APM of playing the spec before with, was it Focused Rage, was it?
Yep.
That is obviously dead and gone. So I don't know. Marok, how does Prot Warrior feel now versus launch? Is it better now? Was it better at launch? What are your thoughts?
I think it's better. I enjoy it more. At launch, people, including myself, complained about how much you had to spam Devastate. It was basically like cast Shield Slam and then spam Devastate until you get a Shield Slam proc. And that wasn't very engaging. And I think adding the chance to reset Shield Slam onto Thunderclap and Revenge just makes the rotation a lot more, active. You have to react to procs way more, and it gives importance to every button. Because, before, you never cast Thunderclap unless you needed to pick things up or you're doing dungeons or something. And now in Raise, you're using all of your abilities, and they all do something impactful in regards to your rotation. So I think the new rotation is way more fun and interesting than previously.
Macro, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm actually quite happy with the 715 changes. I didn't know whether or not I would be when we were waiting for it to come out. I actually quite enjoy high APM. I liked Prot beforehand, but I like it now as well. And I actually prefer the new way to play Vengeance than the old one because it requires more thought and that makes it more engaging for me. Lots of people prefer the old one, and unfortunately, you can't please everyone.
True. So the biggest change, I'll bring up the talent calculator up in the B-roll section here real quick. The biggest change real quick is this new talent. So we'll talk about the tier 75 talent list, this tier row now, because this is like the hotbed currently. So Devastator is new. And for those of you who don't know what this does, is in the tier 75 row. This is not, is this specifically where Inner Rage or Focus Rage used to be, or?
No, it wasn't a talent for Pro. It replaced
Right.
Best Serve Cold, which is now in a different talent row, replacing something else.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, they got rid of Ultimatum and put Best Serve Cold in Ultimatum's spot. Because Ultimatum was the free Focus Rage proc, and Focus Rage is gone, so they had to put
So
something else there.
Devastator is now that your auto attacks deal additional weapon damage, which has some ridiculous math involved in that, but okay. 0.780 times 278% of weapon damage, or 0.028, whatever.
It's the damage that a cast of Devastate would do if you didn't have the talent.
So your auto attacks basically devastate for you, generate 5 rage, and have a 30% chance to reset the remaining cooldown of Shield Slam, which is what Devastate does. So this removes, which is funny, this removes another bar, a button from your bar, essentially. You don't have to Devastate, because it does it automatically. You can't even, can you Devastate normally, though, or does the button go away?
No.
Button's just gone.
Okay. And this now competes with Never Surrender, which Ignore Pain will ignore up to 100% more damage based on missing health. And I believe when I tested this on beta during all of my beta testing, you had to be essentially 1% health to get 99% more Ignore Pain, or you're dead to get 100%, which can happen.
Right.
And then Indomitable, which increases your maximum health by 25% and the maximum effect of Ignore Pain by 25%. And I believe that was per cast, right? Because Ignore Pain sort of stacks twice.
It's and because it increases the well, it stacks more than twice. Because it increases the size of an individual Ignore Pain, it also increases the maximum amount that it can stack to, which is 3 times the maximum of a single cast.
Okay, three times.
It's 3 times the maximum of Ignore Pain on cast. So the Ignore Pain's cap is calculated as you press Ignore Pain, and if you go, it's 3 times that. So if you go over that, then you just get the maximum amount.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can actually, if you get a Dragon Scales proc, for example, which is an artifact trait, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a moment, that will also temporarily raise the cap because it's temporarily raising the amount of an Ignore Pain. And so commensurately raises the cap as well.
Right, that's when the cool little dragon slam down, the scale slam down next to your warrior, and you see the visual, but that gives you, what is that? Blocking an attack has a chance to increase the total damage ignored by your next Ignore Pain by 40%.
Yep.
Yeah. So you get a larger Ignore Pain. So, but I guess walk me through the tier 75 talents and like where these all stack up now. And I know you have a lot of notes and mathy stuff you want to get out there between Never Surrender, Indomitable, and Devastator. So I don't know who wants to take this.
I'll start with the quick one.
Sure.
Never Surrender. Never use, never surrender. So, yeah.
Okay.
Pretty much. Yep.
So whilst it's true that realistically you're going to be able to do any content with any talent choices, although you're making it harder for yourself if you choose bad ones, Never Surrender is more or less strictly weaker than Indomitable for the purposes of survivability. It's true that if you were always on 50% health and you were using, then it would be more total absorption than Indomitable, but it would be worse for survivability to do that. For survivability, Indomitable is definitely a much stronger choice than Never Surrender in virtually all circumstances. However, Indomitable is not necessarily better than Devastator. So that leads into... So there is a legitimate choice on that row, but it doesn't involve Never Surrender.
Okay.
Yeah, there are literally 0 situations where you'd pick Never Surrender. Devastator or Indomitable are always better choices in some aspect. So yeah, the choice comes down between Devastator and Indomitable.
So I guess the big thing you're looking at here, which this actually happened the other day. We were progressing on Mythic Crosis, and we kept having intermittent problems with mass. Again, my main tank, my prot warrior tank, I kept dying. And we were wondering if taking Indomitable would be more helpful at the time. Just having, like, oh, I'm going to click a button and gain 2 million HP, basically. It worked. It was fine. He lost a ton of damage. But it wasn't probably the issue, because what happens here is that because it frees up buttons, Devastator does, it gives you resets as you would normally without having to worry about it on Shield Slam, which gives you more rage to give you more ignore pains. At least for, again, on Crosis, you have to ignore pain to help blunt the damage of that stupid dot, because obviously blocking does nothing. So what's the real deep math behind, like, how much more mitigation do you get with Devastator because of the reset and the rage generation versus Indomitable's just flat game, but then having to go back to spamming Devastating, weaving it into the rotation?
So under normal circumstances where you're getting, I guess, an average amount of rage from damage taken, you're going to get way more total ignore pain absorb using Devastator. Now, if you had, for some reason, insane rage from damage taken, the 25% increased ignore pain, if you're putting all of that rage into ignore pain, it would be possible to get more total ignore pain with Indomitable, but realistically, you're never going to get that much rage from damage taken. So
not even on the hardest hitting mythic fights. Like, it's not anywhere near close to the amount where it would be worth doing it for that reason alone.
Yeah. So in all cases, Devastator is just going to give you more total ignore pain absorb, and because of that, it's a good talent for survivability in certain situations where you don't need that extra health.
It can also be the case that you do need the extra health. So on certain bosses, in particular, for example, on Odin, before the spears were nerfed, lots of warriors who don't know how to call for externals were struggling on staying alive to the spears. And one thing that made that significantly easier is having 25% extra health and also 25% extra to ignore pain at that given moment. So Indomitable is really good for that. It's also good on fights like Hellier, where you have the breaths in phase 3 where you can't get any healing immediately after them. And Indomitable is very good at helping you not die immediately after a breath, even if you're going to survive the breath itself easily either way. Indomitable is very powerful at helping you helping you not die immediately after that, compared to Devastator. So those are two examples of where Indomitable is a really powerful talent for survivability. However, like Marok pointed out, in general, unless your rage from damage taken is ridiculously high, so high that even Mythic Hellier, or even a fight like Blackhand probably wouldn't be enough rage from damage taken for Indomitable to do enough total ignore pain to be more than Devastator. In general, Devastator is significantly higher total ignore pain. Now, as we'll discuss later, damage taken is not the only important thing. Obviously, you need to make sure you actually survive the... Sorry, something's in chat. Music. But I don't know. Not only do you need to make sure that you aren't taking too much damage, but also you have to actually survive the hit, and that's very important. But as long as you are surviving the hit, as long as you're not getting killed so quickly that your healers can't react, right, Devastator will usually mean that you need less total healing. It's usually a good idea to take Devastator for survivability, even on fights like Crosis.
Yeah, in your Crosis, going back to the Crosis example, I would recommend running Devastator.
Of course.
Obviously you have to be good at playing with it, playing around it, but that all those extra ignore pains are really going to help against that dot. And on that fight in particular, you also basically need to be using bops from paladins to soak some slams, because if you have say 5 stacks of the debuff and then you also get slammed, that's a lot of damage. And in situations like that, you just need a bop or something to survive.
Wait. Why would tank soak the slams when you have perfectly capable rogues?
That's true.
Well, exactly.
You could have rogue soak them.
And though it's true that it's harder to soak the slams with Devastator than it is with Indomitable, it's still probably a good idea not to do it, even if you were using Indomitable.
I think we are... Oh, go ahead.
And one final point about Devastator, which is extremely important, but may or may not factor into your considerations, is that Devastator is an enormous DPS increase.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's probably the weirdest part about that tier is that Devastator is a flat damage increase, like
A ridiculously large one.
over the other two that don't do anything for damage.
Yeah,
I don't know if. I mean, I
It's
get
a
it.
weird
but
tier.
yeah.
You have one talent that's basically worthless, one talent that only affects survivability, and then another talent that affects survivability and damage. It's
both.
And is the best for both of those in most situations.
Yeah.
In my opinion, it's poor design. I really liked the initial idea for Devastator, where it was essentially going to be a talent for people that weren't very good and couldn't manage to press a button every global cooldown. And then they changed how Revenge worked, and that change to Revenge really significantly changed the effectiveness of Devastator for survivability in particular. I was fine with it being a talent that's, a DPS option when you don't need survivability, and okay for survivability if you're terrible at the game. But now that's not the case, and to be honest, I think that's poor design, even if I do enjoy playing with it, because it means that the other talents don't really compete with it properly.
Yeah, and with that said, though, Indomitable still remains a very good talent for survivability. So if you
That's
don't like,
absolutely the case,
yeah, if you don't like playing with Devastator, or you just don't like the talent, then you can still run Indomitable, and you'll still be, considerably tanky, tankier over like Never Surrender. So it's still a viable option to run Indomitable.
Okay.
Yeah, and again, realistically, you could probably tank, especially non-mythic, with no talents if you were doing your rotation well. And that's maybe a slight exaggeration in some cases, but Indomitable is absolutely still a strong talent. It was easily the strongest talent before 715, and it hasn't actually changed. It just got a competitor, which is often better. Indomitable is just as strong as it always was, and is a very powerful talent in its own right.
It's funny to think back, because all my beta testing I tested every single class and spec twice. I put about probably 6 to 10 hours in every spec, and I remember very specifically going into launch, probably because we just had less HP, like you were taking more damage earlier on based on your percentage-based HP. Never Surrender was so good, and now it's just like no. It's just like it swung so heavy in the other direction, which is funny because they buffed Indomitable though to make it better, but then Never Surrender just like flew off the.
Yeah, and the funny thing about that is it was so when we got first access to the talents, it was 100%, up to 100% increase Ignore Pain on Never Surrender, and then they nerfed it to 75% when no one used it in the first place.
And they buffed it back.
Yeah, and then they put it back to 100%. So I'm not really sure what their thought process is behind this talent, because no one takes it.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
And it's like they think it's good, but it's really not. I don't know.
But yeah, like mathematically, you need to be at half HP when you Ignore Pain for Never Surrender to be worth it over Indomitable.
No, you need to be below 75% health in order for it to do more Ignore Pain.
Oh, to do
but
more,
the fact that you lose the stamina and the fact that you lose the extra health means that at no health point is it going to be worth sitting at for survivability. Right. Never Surrender has never been the best talent to use since release. There was a very specific circumstance where you may have considered using it, which was if you were tanking 4 Drakes on Scenarios and you didn't really have much healing, you might decide to sit at low health a lot. It's particularly good on like a tanking dummy for that reason, because you're not getting any healing, so you can afford to sit on low health, and then the only thing that matters is how much Ignore Pain are you putting out.
Fair enough, yeah.
But I don't think it's ever been a viable option compared to Indomitable, except for very odd, specific circumstances, and I certainly wouldn't ever use it now.
Fair enough.
And going back to that point on, you need to be below 75% health to get more and Ignore Pain from Never Surrender than you would from Indomitable. You actually, if you take into account the extra health you get from Indomitable, you need to be below. And it changes with gear. So the more gear you get, the worse Never Surrender is. And you need to be below something like 40% HP to actually have more effective health.
Oh, wow.
With Never Surrender than Indomitable. So it's just really not a good talent.
And if the idea that you might deliberately be on 40% health to improve your survivability is insane.
Yeah.
That's just stupid.
Yeah,
No
because
one thinks that's good.
prot warriors aren't brewmaster monks that actually get better as they get lower in HP because they can juggle their HP and stagger very well. But yeah, prot warrior can't do that. So let's move over to the Warplate of the Obsidian Aspect. So this is going to be your tier 19 set right now. And then we'll go through talents because this sort of all goes together. So the 2-piece you have for protection is you gain a 20% increased chance to critically block while shield block is active, and then your critical blocks generate 5 rage. So going back to how important rage is, and again, we're living in this Devastator being super important right now, where you get even more rage, and you get all the passive resets on shield slam to get more rage. So how important and how impactful is the tier 19 set? And I guess the first question is too, is the 20% increased critical block chance additive or multiplicative? It sounds additive.
It's additive.
Okay.
Yeah, it's additive.
Sounds good. But yeah, I mean,
Marok, do you want to...
Yeah,
they're good. You do want the 2-piece and 4-piece. The 2-piece in particular is very strong. In other words, it's saying on every block you have a 20% chance to reduce the damage by another, 42%? Just going from a block to a crit block is 42% damage reduction. And 4-piece, it's particularly good in dungeons. When you have a bunch of mobs on you, every crit block. What's the ICD on it, Macro? Yeah.
1 second.
Yeah, 4-piece has a 1-second ICD, but even still, getting an extra 5 rage every second is good.
Yeah, because if you're being hit by 5 things at a time, you're very likely to critically block. As long as you have shield block up, you're very likely to critically block one of those every second or so. Whereas if you're only being hit by one thing every 1.5 seconds, the odds that you're going to critically block every second is extremely low. Sure. So the value of it does go up the more targets you have. That's definitely the case. But as Marok said, it is still worth it, even on single target. But it's not necessarily worth losing a lot of gear, a lot of item level for just the 4 set in and of itself.
Yeah, I wouldn't drop item level for the 4 set, but despite the fact that the pieces don't have the best itemization, you still just want to go for it. Like, chest is crit versus high crit, but if that drops and it's the same item level, you should take it. Because they're just worth getting.
Whereas the 2 set is extremely powerful. It's worth. It's a mastery has kind of 3 components. One of them is not really relevant because you have shield block up anyway. Mm-hmm. One of them increases ignore pain, and one of them increases your critical block chance. And the 2 set is basically the 3rd component of mastery. And if you just look at that part of mastery, it's worth over 5,000 mastery.
Wow.
So while shield block is up, and shield block is not always up, but you always have it up at least when it's relevant and as much as possible. So it's worth a lot, the 2 set in particular.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it depends on I guess it depends on the boss too. I don't think we have any bosses right now that count as dual wield attack speed, because obviously you can critically block them more often than a regular boss that has the normal whack kind of attack timer. But we'll see how that...
Well, some bosses do have ads.
Sure,
but in general, I don't think anything significant matters you more than once every 1.5 seconds.
Right.
Yeah.
Apart from Annihilate, which would is several ticks a second.
Yeah, I was about to ask. Yeah, is Annihilate counted as a melee attack that's blockable?
Well, it's not a melee attack, but it is blockable. Yes.
Oh, okay, right. It's like a Fist of Fury, basically. That's what she's doing. So
yeah.
On
Gul'dan, if your melee decide to troll you and give him 10 stacks, then you're gonna be getting hit pretty often.
That's yeah, that's fair.
That's fair. So I guess what 4 most optimal pieces do you want to go for then? Of the 6, if you could pick the 4.
So
helm, shoulders, cloak, and legs.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
And that's partially because of the stats, but also because the best in slot, or one of the best in slot legendaries is probably the gloves.
Right.
Also, if you had, for example, the legendary chest, which is not great in terms of the effect on it, but it has very good stats, and it's 940 chest, so it's obviously really good stats. If you had the legendary chest, then you'd want to get something else, ideally. So it depends on what legendaries you have, and realistically take what drops. Honestly, secondary stats do not make that big of a difference. If you had to drop item level for certain items, you'd want to drop it on ones that were not big items in terms of stat budget, which is chest and helm, then shoulders and legs, and then other items.
Okay. Because
so I wouldn't worry about the secondaries to that extent, really.
Right, because that's what I was gonna tie that into, which is normally in there, and I kind of moved it down to here now in my brain. Is secondary stats for tanks are interesting, and I know the chat asked earlier, like, how much haste do I want? But
they are trolling.
So right, of course. But so how do secondary stats break down then with all this taken into account? Because like for a DPS outside of legendaries, we obviously all want like helm, chest, legs first off, because they have the highest stat budget for our agility, our strength, our intellect, etc. So normally with secondaries in those we just kind of like deal with, because those are the rawest, best stats. The highest eye level in those three sockets would be important. But you didn't mention the chest, is why I was curious. But yeah, what's secondary stat balance look like for Prot Warrior? If one even wants to break that down real quick.
Well, so secondary stats as a whole are less important for tanks because stamina has importance for tanks, which basically means item level upgrades are more important. Any item level upgrade is usually going to be an upgrade, regardless of the secondary stats they have, just because of stamina and armor. Armor is also a very important stat. So, take those two things into consideration, and that, sort of lowers the value of secondaries.
Okay. But overall then, eye level is sort of like the best.
Yeah, you generally just want to, if something's an eye level increase, it's probably an upgrade and you should probably equip it. Okay. If anything, it's like, if it was a 10 eye level increase, that's almost guaranteed to be an upgrade. If 5 eye level increase, you should look at the stats. If it's 15, it absolutely is an upgrade.
Okay. But that aside,
is there... to be clear, that doesn't necessarily apply to trinkets, obviously.
Yeah, yeah. Sure. Trinkets are a whole another beast.
Sure. But I guess that aside, though, there is still like an ebb and a flow that you want to try to aim for with your gear, right? Is there like a hierarchy on what stat priority you would like to sort of aim for protection? Like, is there feel good points? I know the whole 30% haste thing comes up. So what about that whole side of?
So yeah, we can talk about haste in particular first, because that's probably the most, I guess, confusing thing when it comes to stats or prot. So right now, haste is the best stat per point until you get to a certain percentage. Now, a lot of people take that to mean that you need a certain amount of haste, which just isn't the case. It's the best stat until you hit that percentage, which means it's a limit. It's not a cap, it's not a break point, but it's just the best until that percent. And currently, we don't know for sure, but that cap or that limit is about 35 to 40% haste. So you'd want to hit 35 to 40% haste, but you don't want to sacrifice item level for that. And then after that is mastery. Mastery is just a good stat. Versatility, and then crit. Mastery and versatility, and especially with all the magic damage in Nighthold, they're probably about equal in value. Maybe mastery will be ahead on high physical damage fights, versus ahead on something like Star Augur, right. And then crit is significantly worse than all of the other secondaries.
I would assume crit falls into that whole, because the tanks, Mass and Sam, my two tanks, were going back and forth the other day about like, I have no bag space. I have like a verse set and a haste set and a crit DPS verse set for dungeons and all this other stuff in my bags. So I'm sure that might fall into that category of like, well, if you're going to do mythic pluses and you want to do damage. Right.
Well, there's that as well, but even for survivability, crit is not great, but it's not nothing. I mean, parry on average is quite a reasonable damage reduction stat. The problem with that is that on average doesn't necessarily matter, because you could just get unlucky and not parry 3 hits in a row and then you die. You certainly can't rely on parrying. So obviously you get around reliable stats, which always do something. Haste is improving your average rage generation and shield block uptime. you can still get unlucky, but the more haste you have, the less you being unlucky will make a difference. The mastery is also RNG, similar to crit, but it's unlike crit, there's no diminishing returns. Unlike crit, it's a lot stronger per point at average damage reduction.
Right.
And versatility is always there. So, but on the other hand, crit, in terms of damage that you can parry, is actually not that bad. So whilst it's not desirable, and you don't necessarily want to, and you certainly wouldn't want to enchant crit for survivability or something like that, an item is not worthless because it has crit. It's fine. And if you were comparing two items of the same item level and one of them had crit and the other didn't, the one that doesn't have crit is probably better. But if you're comparing two items of different item level, even if the higher one has crit and the lower one doesn't, the higher one is probably better.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people, they'll get a 20 item level upgrade on a particular piece, but they'll say it's worthless because it has crit on it, and that's just not the case. And
it's just so, yeah.
Yeah, it's still an upgrade. You have the armor, the stamina, the extra strength, just the higher total secondary stats. And crit still has value, so it's still an upgrade.
Well, yeah, you brought up that point about how obviously important stamina is for any tank, right? But
yes.
I know for certain tanks, Protection Warrior in particular, obviously strength is really important because it directly impacts Ignore Pain. Like, strength is attack power is defense, essentially. Like, not many tanks get the same back and forth on that.
Do you want to talk about this, Mark?
Sure. So that's true. Strength does give you AP, which increases, total Ignore Pain, but strength still isn't that great of a stat.
Okay.
It's Ignore Pain doesn't scale that well with strength, and with how other stats work and interact, they're still better than strength. It is nice though to have Ignore Pain scale with strength because you can just take that into account when looking at gear. It's like, this does have strength, so it's going to increase my Ignore Pain a little, but it's not something that you particularly focus on when looking at stats.
Right.
Like per point, for example, strength is demonstrably significantly worse than versatility. They do exactly the same thing in terms of increasing Ignore Pain by different amounts per point, obviously. And versatility also gives you a certain amount of damage reduction. So it's relatively easy to compare the two because you can look at a certain level of damage reduction, strength is better, and when you go over that amount of damage reduction, versatility is better per point. Now, they're not normally competing in a per point basis, but still. So that level where above that level of damage taken, versatility is better, is extremely low. Versatility is always better whenever you're taking any relevant damage at all per point than strength. And versatility is not that great anyway. It's not bad, but it's not that brilliant. So strength is really not particularly strong for survivability. It's still something, and it's something to take into account when you have an item level upgrade. It's part of the reason why item level upgrades are usually upgrades, but it's just not that strong.
Right. No, that all makes total sense. I guess the bet brings up because you were going on how eye level is so important, and obviously there's impacts to strength, but not like just completely face value. So good. Sounds good to me. I think with all that gone over, let's actually walk through the talents now. I'll bring this up. Marok, you want to walk me through sort of talent builds and options and thoughts on the talents? Again,
sure.
We can skip over 75. We've already sort of went over that quite heavily.
Well, I was going to ask while we're on the topic of stats, do we want to talk about stamina a little more?
I think we need to talk about that a bit.
Sure.
So people are under the impression that stamina isn't that great, or it only matters for burst damage, and that's not really true. Stamina's really efficient at increasing your effective health, and any damage reduction can be expressed as effective health. So stamina, the way I like to explain why stamina is good is if you look at a particular hit and how much damage it does, if you have more stamina, that's going to reduce the total impact that hit had on you. And it's the same thing that damage reduction does, right? So if you were looking at the percentage of your health and you put shield wall up, right? It's going to take off less, percentage of your health, and it's the same thing with stamina. You'll lose, less percentage of your health. Now that obviously doesn't tell the whole story because you're still actually taking more damage if you were to increase your stamina, which needs to be healed back up.
Right.
But it's still a good stat for survivability.
And the fact of the matter is, often you'll take a lot of overhealing, and often healers will not have to heal you. And if you had more stamina, it's not necessarily difficult to heal that extra health. And increasing your health by 5k and reducing a particular hit by 5k is exactly the same at helping you survive. The only difference is that for stamina, it has to be healed up. But that's not necessarily difficult. And stamina, usually, when it's competing with other things, per point, increases your health by significantly more than the amount of damage reduction you get from other stats. So obviously you can't just have a ridiculously large amount of health and then take all the damage without it being healed up at all. However, you can go for extra health at the cost of taking a bit more damage in total, because that will improve your survivability overall. It will reduce the number of times when you would have died. It will make it easier to heal you. Even though you need more healing, it will make it easier to do that healing.
Right. No, it makes sense. I mean, I'm sure in like the MMO Champion Guide or listed in the Skyhold Discord, there's probably some effective health breakdown, because most of the effective health is just between HP and armor. But there's obviously a lot more that goes into that because of math is not that easy in World of Warcraft. So, but what?
Well, I mean, everything is effective health, really. Even if you consider crit on average, it's effective health, although obviously because of its unreliable nature, in parrying it's not. But haste is effective health because it's increasing your rage generation, which is ignore pain, and it's increasing your shield block up time, which is a very significant increase to effective health.
Well, that's what I mean. Like, effective health overall, to break down for each individual tank, has so much more involved in it because of how their different stats are priorities and what affects them. But for the most part, obviously, the whole point of that was that stamina is important. So that goes all the way back to Marok's talk about how people would look at secondary stats on an upgraded piece, higher eye level, and think it's not an upgrade, that's just like it's not true.
Yep.
So,
and while we're on the subject, I'd like to briefly talk about like stamina flask versus strength flask. So this is something that depends a bit on the expansion, but right now, stamina flasks give you quite a lot more effective health than a strength flask would, for example. It's the case that obviously a strength flask is better for ignoring DPS, because naturally, if you're interested in increasing your DPS and you don't care about your survivability, then obviously you should go for a strength flask in that case. But if you're talking about just for survivability, a strength flask will be less helpful helping you survive than a stamina flask will be. And you can contrast this with Devastator and Indomitable, because Indomitable gives you more effective health at any given moment, and Devastator gives you more damage reduction in total. And the difference between the two is that it's the ratio that's different. So whilst relative to the amount of damage reduction you get from a strength flask, a stamina flask gives you a lot of effective health. The opposite is true for Indomitable and Devastator, where Devastator will give you an enormous amount more total ignore pain compared to the amount of ignore pain that you get with Indomitable. And that usually, although not always, but usually makes it worth taking Devastator rather than taking Indomitable.
Right. No, I mean, I have the consumable tag here that is after talents, but we can go over that right now and then go into the talent breakdown specifically. So you brought up the two different flasks, but then you wanted to make sure we went over potions and even like the rage potion, apparently. But potions are weird for tanks because you have an armor potion, prolonged power, and old war, whereas DPS only have prolonged and old war, deadly grace, right? And then tanks, at least rage-based tanks, you can utilize the rage potions from last expansion. So I don't know, do you have anything you wanted to go over on consumables on that aspect as well?
So to break down potions,
Right.
yeah, like you said, there are basically three choices: the armor potion, which is unbending, prolonged power, and old war. So if you're going for DPS, obviously use old war. Prolonged power can be better for DPS if you're doing like huge pulls in dungeons or something, because the more targets, the better prolonged power is. But I don't even know the number of targets you need for prolonged power to be better. So in most cases, old war is just going to be better for DPS. And as for unbending, it's going to be significantly stronger than prolonged power for survivability if you're taking physical damage. So on a fight like Star Augur, you'd want to just pot prolonged power all the time, because the increase to strength and stamina is going to help you survive on that fight where armor is going to do basically nothing. So
yeah, because the comets are physical damage on Star Augur, but they're not really the main component of the threatening damage.
Yeah, so in certain situations, prolonged power is just your best potion, just because of, how much physical damage you're going to be taking. It lasts 60 seconds, and it has a DPS component too. So if you're looking for a potion that does something for your survivability and damage, then just use prolonged power. And it's also cheap. So like on progression, just pot prolonged power all the time, and you're good.
Mythic Plus is you chug at every trash pack, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. A quick note on the Rage Potion is that although it's extremely powerful for druids, because for example, if you compare the armor gain you get from the Iron Furs that you can cast with a Rage Potion compared to the amount of armor you get from Unbending Potion, it's extremely strong for druids, but it's very weak for warrior compared to even a prolonged power, let alone unbending. So I wouldn't recommend using Rage Potion for warriors, even though it's good for druids.
That's right. I know you wanted me to just have a caveat to that in the show for sure, but yeah, that makes the most sense. I mean, the thing about Old War, if I'm not mistaken, as well, at least with the warrior class, because of Battlecry, doesn't Old War procs in Battlecry guarantee crits, right? Too? Because it's like a
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So that's
also if you're using Avatar or Renewed Fury, they'll benefit from that, and also from Booming Voice. Yeah, and also from Booming Voice if you're using that talent as well.
Yeah, that all makes sense. Yeah, that's why people always bring up for me why I only use Prolonged Power as an Enhancement Shaman. But like, I have no damage amplification increases as an Enhancement Shaman. All I do is sort of just continuously do what I do, right? So Prolonged Power, lasting a minute, giving me 2,500 agility, increasing all that damage is way more important than the burst window of Old War in 25 seconds. Because again, I don't have anything that amps it. But if you're a warrior, DPS warrior, or prot warrior overall, it affects Battlecry and again the other sources of damage. Percentage-based damage increases on your character, your player, will increase Old War's damage, because essentially during that time, you just have like an RPPM trinket that just hits for damage. So if you amplify your damage, Old War goes up as well. So. All right. Well, now we can do talents, I guess.
Yes.
We went a roundabout way. So, Marok, I don't know, walk me through some builds and thoughts. Start with 15s, and we'll just go down through these, where their strengths and weaknesses lie.
Sure. So, first tier is basically your utility tier. You have an AoE stun, single target stun, and another AoE stun, but that works slightly differently.
Yeah.
So personally, in most situations, I just take Shockwave on like everything. I haven't switched off Shockwave in a long time. It's really good for dungeons. You just stun everything in front of you for 3 seconds, interrupt casts, and it's on a 20-second cooldown if you have 3 or more targets. So that makes it really good. Stormbolt. Now, actually, the interesting thing about Stormbolt is you can take it for damage purposes if you're using Devastator, because you will have downtime during Devastator where you just literally have nothing to cast, and in those empty GCDs you can just throw a Stormbolt in there if you wanted to. And that's kind of the only use Stormbolt has, in my opinion. I
agree.
They did nerf Shockwave recently from a 4-second stun to a 3-second stun. I don't really think that was necessary, but whatever.
Probably because it's just
I'd say it's necessary. It was a very strong ability otherwise.
That's true.
It's probably a good idea to quickly talk about the Warbringer change. Warbringer used to be an extremely powerful talent, and they buffed it in one respect. They increased the stun duration. It's not on the same DR as other stuns, so it doesn't compete with stuns that other people in your group uses. However, they made it much harder to use. So it no longer stuns around a friendly target if you intercept to a friendly target and intervene. Rather. So, which means that you'd have to stun something that you're standing next to. You'd need to run away or leap away and then charge back in, and that makes it significantly more difficult to use and probably not worth it most of the time. So I also usually go with Shockwave most of the time.
Interesting. Okay, that's fair enough. What about 30s?
So 30.
So there's actually a lot to talk about here, even though people think there isn't.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sure. So impending victory. Let's go over impending victory first. That's basically the go-to talent for dungeons. When you're killing trash, you can get a lot of resets on that heal, and it's really, really good for survivability. Just to be able to hit that and just heal yourself immediately.
But if you get it resets, then you don't need impending victory. Like the value of impending victory is when you don't have the resets.
No, I'm just saying like victory rush in general is a good ability.
Right. Oh, sure.
And and having that heal, you don't have to get that reset for that heal is really good. So inspiring presence is basically the go-to raid talent. Heals everyone for 3% of the damage they deal, except for the warrior that has inspiring presence. It used to heal the warrior for 3% of the damage they dealt, but they got rid of that for whatever reason.
Yeah, it only affects everyone else, not you, right?
Yeah, exactly. And
I think
safe.
it ever affected you.
It did.
I think in beta, you could stack.
Yeah.
You could stack them.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
You used to be able to stack them with 2 pro warriors.
Yeah.
But they removed that as well.
Yep. And then safeguard is a talent no one really talks about or takes, but it can be very, very good in certain situations. So like Odin, for example, if your co-tank was about to take a spear, just intercept them and 30% of that spear damage goes to you, which is pretty significant. Or like Helia breaths, intercept the co-tank before that, and you take off.
Because it's important to note that it only matters what damage they're taking at that point. If you take 30% of the spear, it's not going to do anything significant at all because you're not taking any significant damage at all. But you could be easily helping them survive when they might not, or they might have struggled to otherwise.
Yeah, it's good in certain situations, but no one really talks about it. So.
But it is also important to notice that it's bound to your intervene, and intervening can cause some mechanics to go on you that you didn't intend to. So, for example, if you intervene your co-tank and then they take an arcane slash on Trilliax or recursive strikes on High Botanist, those mechanics will go on you instead via intervene. So you can't use safeguard for that purpose.
I know. Yeah, I was about to say, it's called intercept macro. Get with the times. We're in Legion now. But yeah, it's all on one button. But yeah, that's fair enough. I think our tanks have used safeguard a few times, but that's very true. You don't want to take stacks of a debuff on a tank to save your other tank because then you just doomed you both. So don't do that.
Yeah.
All right, what's up? 45s, and then keep going.
45 is damaged here, basically. Nothing in here affects survivability whatsoever. So Renewed Fury, you have to cast Ignore Pain to get that 10% damage buff. So if you're casting Ignore Pain a lot, you can have very high uptime on Renewed Fury, and that's probably going to be best for DPS, compared to Avatar. Avatar is really, really good for burst phases. If there's or dungeons, if there's, you can gather up a bunch of ads, pop Avatar, and Battle Cry, and just blow them up. That'll be a significant amount of damage over Renewed Fury. Let's see, Best Served Cold. Macro, do you want to talk about Best Served Cold?
Does this actually does this work properly now? Because I know in beta this thing was a barrel of complete nonsense.
Yes, it does.
Okay.
So Best Served Cold is the best talent if you have, in general, if Revenge is doing more than 40% of your damage and you have 5 or more targets, which is rarely the case. So Best Served Cold is usually not actually a strong option. Usually it's a choice between Renewed Fury and Avatar, and it simply comes down to whether or not you need to use Ignore Pain a lot. If you don't need to use Ignore Pain a lot, because you don't need survivability for the content that you're doing, then Avatar is going to be significantly stronger. If you do need to use Ignore Pain a lot, then depending on how bursty the damage is, Renewed Fury is probably stronger, but Avatar may be stronger if it's a short window.
Okay.
I think we should probably try and move on a bit faster. So, do you want to talk about Warlord's Challenge quickly, Mark?
Well, I was gonna.
Sure.
Yeah, I was gonna just bring up on the side note. I think that Avatar is usually brought a lot because you snapshot nonsense with Avatar and Warcry and your shield most of the time, and that's why I see a lot of Avatars normally for damage. But yeah, that's fair. I was gonna transition over to 60 and saying you take Crackling Thunder all the time because it looks awesome, right?
It does look pretty cool, yeah. We can talk about the level 45 talents more when we get to the 90 talents, because what talents you pick there affect the 45 ones. But anyway, moving on. So Warlord's Challenge. That's a talent I run most of the time. I find it to be incredibly useful in a lot of situations. So like if you mess up a taunt, right, and taunts on cooldown, well, just pop Zerga Rage and correct that mistake. It makes the boss move faster towards you. So if you need to move the boss to a certain position, you leap away, pop Zerga Rage and taunt, and it'll come right over to you really fast. Just like the utility that it gives you is really, really helpful.
And it's usually a lot more helpful than the other talent choices. I find Crackling Thunder nice in dungeons. It's a shame that they nerfed it in 7.15. I really don't think that was necessary. But it's no doubt that Warlord's Challenge has excellent utility, both from the lack of a cooldown on your taunt, which is often really useful, especially for skittish dungeons. But also the fact that the boss will run over to you faster can sometimes be extremely useful.
Yeah, like on Guarm, when you don't tell your raid you're going to taunt during charge and it just kills everyone.
Oh, no, don't do that. We had
or on Trilliax, where if you taunt it during Annihilation...
It spins faster.
It bugs. No, it doesn't spin faster. It stops spinning, but the beam will actually keep going without an animation. And kill everyone.
I didn't even know that. That's awesome.
Yeah, don't. We did the Guarm thing with a Mistweaver on progression. I was like, you should totally taunt him when he runs, because he ends the run faster. But then the ticks happened even faster and it killed us. Don't do that. Don't do that. Now you probably can heal through it, but on progression back,
But yeah, Crackling Thunder is good for dungeons or when you need to pick up ads. Bounding Stride if you need extra mobility. Like, Bounding Stride is really good on Odin, get away from spears. But yeah, overall, I think Warlord's Challenge is generally the best option in that tier.
Yeah.
90s?
So, yeah, if we move on to the level 90 talents. So realistically, you have two options. Well, you have three options. So Into the Fray, let's start with that. Into the Fray is essentially a weak talent compared to the other options in all circumstances. One of the others is always better than Into the Fray. It gives you haste. It gives you more haste the more haste you have, which it doesn't actually say, but that is how it works. And it gives you more haste the more enemies are there, up to 5. It's just not very good, either for DPS or for survivability compared to the other talents. So if you're using Devastator, which as we discussed earlier, we generally recommend that you use, Vengeance is basically necessary for survivability because it allows you to cast Revenge for effectively free, because the cost of Revenge goes into reducing the cost of Ignore Pain.
Right.
You can't just not cast Revenge. If you do that and you've got Devastator, please just delete your character. Like,
Wow.
Actually, put some thought into what you're doing, for God's sake. Like some of the MMO champion, but I'm sorry, but like some of the MMO champion posts I've seen recently just blow my mind. If you've got like 3 main buttons, you can't just not press one of them. So for survivability, with Devastator, you basically have to take Vengeance. Sure. That's not necessarily the case with if you have Indomitable. If you have Indomitable, Vengeance is still usually the best. But on a fight like Star Augur, where you don't get the Revenge procs from parrying because you're not parrying anything, Booming Voice may be a better talent. However, with Devastator, you certainly always want to go with Vengeance for survivability. And Booming Voice is clearly the strongest for damage done. In all circumstances, it's just extremely good.
Oh, right. You couple Warcry and Demoralizing Shout into Avatar and pop your shield, just like blah, blah. The 1 million plus Prot Warrior burst damage, then it just like, it's good for like 8 seconds, then it just disappears. But it's strong though. It's definitely bursty. Fair enough. And then
Sorry, did we talk about the level 45 choices with Vengeance and Booming Voice?
Well, go for me. You can go for it now. I mean, I was gonna bring up
Okay, yeah,
100s, but yeah, go for it.
So basically, if you're taking Vengeance, you should run Renewed Fury because you're going to be casting Ignore Pain a lot due to just having to rotate between Revenge and Ignore Pain with Vengeance. So Renewed Fury is going to be best with that. If you're taking Booming Voice, you want to line up Booming Voice, Avatar, and Battle Cry, and that makes Avatar, the better DPS choice with that talent selected. So
Yeah.
you basically always have to
again,
take one with the other.
Yeah, and again, that's the talent. So you'd use one of them if you needed survivability in general, and you'd use the other if you needed DPS in general, or if you didn't need survivability. Rather.
I guess here's the question from like a DPS standpoint then too. Like, in what order do you pop these abilities? I assume you Avatar
makes
then.
No difference.
Well, I mean, there are very small windows of time. Battlecry lasts 5 seconds, for example, and Demoralizing Shout lasts 8, but Avatar lasts what 20. So.
That makes a difference.
No. He's saying, like, do you want to pop? You're basically asking if you want to pop them together, right?
Right. Well, you can't. They're not
like
all
how
off
you
the
line them
global
up.
cooldown or whatever. Yeah, how they
Right.
line up. So people.
So you'd want to line everything up
They
with
are
Battle
all-
Cry because.
No, hang on. They are all off the global cooldown.
Oh yeah, they are. They're not on. None of them are on the GCD.
You'd use
Really?
all of them at the same time.
Yeah.
Demo
Avatar-
Shout, Avatar, and Battlecry are off the global.
Yes.
Yeah.
Holy crap! I didn't. Okay, so I didn't know. Make sure everyone knows that. Okay, so you can actually just macro them together if
Yes.
you wanted to, but.
But no, you did bring up a good point where you do generally want to line everything up with Battlecry because Battlecry effectively just doubles your damage
Sure.
for that duration. So, double your damage, then put your other, damage increases on top of that, and that's a lot of damage. So, yeah, just use everything with Battlecry.
Right, well, that's fair enough. Well, I bring it up because of, like, for the main example of here is lining it up with Neltharion's Fury, which only channels for 3 seconds, but you want to make sure you're in that 3 seconds, you Neltharion's Fury in the Battlecry window, because then that's some juicy damage. So
Actually, Neltharion's Fury doesn't do that much damage. You'd be better off
just shield slamming?
Yeah, like you'd wait until shield slams off cooldown, pop everything, and then try to get as many shield slams inside that window as you can.
Okay.
That'll generally be more damage than Neltharion's Fury.
Just making sure. These are all little things that people might want to know. All right, cool. How about anything to go on 100s?
So just to get Ravager out of the way, it's basically it's like Ravager and Never Surrender. Just don't take them. There's really no situations where you'd take Ravager over the other two options. If you were
better
tanking,
than not having a talent. I mean,
Yeah.
Well,
they have that going for it.
Wow.
like Ravager would be good for DPS if you could do massive pulls. Like if you rounded up everything in Mob Souls, in that first pull when you can pull everything to the boss, not even that I don't think would be enough to make Ravager worth taking.
Aww.
And for survivability purposes, you'd almost always be better off with Heavy Repercussions just because the smoothing aspect, right? It was the sort of the same thing with parry, how we were talking about parry before, where if you get unlucky, you don't parry 4 attacks in a row, you're just dead. And with Heavy Repercussions and shield block, you're just blocking, and that's it's guaranteed. So
Right.
it's just Ravager's just not worth taking. Anger Management is really, really good on fights like Crosis and Star Augur, where you need those cooldowns, and there's in magic damage.
The blocking is significantly lower. Yeah.
Yeah, like Crosis, the vast majority of the damage you're taking is magic damage, which is unblockable, which makes having those extra cooldowns really, really good, especially to soak all those slams. So I guess sort of to break that down more, take Heavy Repercussions if there's a lot of blockable damage and you need to have shield block up all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Take anger Management if you need more cooldowns.
Yep. No, that makes total sense, because they both, and this is the thing we always brought up back in I remember the most egregious part of this for Protection Warrior, as my brain flashes back, was mostly, I think, it had to have been Mop, where like every talent, because it's the first time we had the new talent rework for Prot Warriors, was all like everything was a damage talent. There was like one row of survivability talents, so it's much better now that you have like a weaving of them. Because not only does Anger Management give you Last Stand, Shield Wall, and Demoralizing Shout, but you also get Battle Cry. And Heavy Repercussions gives you more damage when you're blocking on Shield Slam. So they weave that together finally, opposed to like, well, how do you spec your Prot Warrior? Well, how much damage do you want to do? That's how it used to be.
Yeah,
So
I think it's definitely made the choices more interesting this time around.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, another thing I want to mention is that with heavy repercussions, it's I think overall it's better for damage done than anger management, and that also depends on what other talents you take. So if you were taking like booming voice, for example, you probably want to take anger management, get more demo shouts and more of that damage buff. But
Yeah, I mean, without if you don't have booming voice, then heavy repercussions is certainly the strongest talent for single target, and probably for a small number of targets. If you do have booming voice, then heavy repercussions is probably still the best on single target. We're not really sure right now, unfortunately. They're certainly going to be very close to each other either way. I think it might depend on the amount of damage you're taking. The more damage you're taking, the better anger management is. But probably still heavy repercussions for single target DPS. But with booming voice, then on AoE, anger management is a clear winner. So in like Mythic Plus, if you were doing Mythic Plus and you didn't care about your survivability, you'd go with Avatar, booming voice, anger management, and you'd have all your cooldowns up for every pack and do loads of DPS.
Sounds good.
Yep. I guess just to make one quick final point about this tier is before 715, you'd basically always run heavy repercussions, and with the buff to anger management, it's significantly improved the strength of that talent.
Repercussions.
Yeah, and they nerf heavy repercussions. So like choosing, you have an actual choice now in that tier between anger management and heavy repercussions.
So there are some bosses where you might decide that you would want to consider using anger management, even if a talent seems like the obvious best one. So for example, for Spellblade Aluriel, I'm of the opinion that heavy repercussions is always going to be the best for survivability on Spellblade Aluriel. However, if you're having difficulty with the Annihilates, like a certain other member of this chat was, then you might consider using anger management and having demo shout out more frequently. I think that heavy repercussions is still the best option for that fight.
In my opinion on Spellblade, I would recommend anger management. You will take less damage overall with heavy repercussions, but the dangerous thing in that fight is the Annihilates, and having more cooldowns for those Annihilates makes the fight easier, in my opinion. But your mileage may vary, so just try out both and see which one works better for you.
And frankly, if you're struggling to survive with Annihilates on Spellblade, you can always have a DPS taunt, get the debuff, and then you taunt back, and then that makes that quite trivial.
That's true, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are some... I haven't done Spellblade on Mythic yet to figure out the nonsense, but that's... Does the debuff for Annihilate only apply when she starts casting it, and that's why you can taunt her and then taunt back?
Yeah.
Yeah, she starts the cast. Once that cast ends, it applies the debuff, and then she starts the channel.
No.
Yep.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, the debuff is what makes you take more damage from the following ability, but if you put that on your Fury Warrior, and then your Prot Warrior taunts back, there's no debuff on the tank.
Right, yep.
Yeah, good job, Blizzard, on that one. Good job. It's almost like she should have put a debuff on you as it was channeling instead of cast, whatever.
Yeah,
just little things to min-max, so, okay. Let's go over...
So there's a couple of things that we wanted to talk about, and that seems like a good place to do it. So the artifact ability, many people like Marok...
I was bringing the artifact up right now.
Many people like Marok don't ever use it, and it's actually...
Wow. Yes, I do. Come on.
very useful in certain situations. So one of those is where it's usually quite obvious. So if you've got significant damage coming from blockable abilities, and the most obvious example of that is Annihilation on Spellblade Aluriel, or the Ice Comets on Star Augur are blockable, even though the other ones aren't. I don't know why. Those are blockable, and that means that you can guarantee a critical block on them with Maltharian's Fury. But it's not only useful in those situations, it's also really useful as a filler for when you have shield block down, and you're just taking melee hits, because it has the same effect as shield block. It guarantees that all your blocks will be, all your melee hits will be blocks. It also makes them critical blocks. So it's really good defensively for filling in gaps in shield block.
Yep. I just want to say that I hate Maltharian's Fury. I think it's the worst ability ever made, and
wow.
I hope it dies.
Wow.
In contrast, I'm totally fine with it. I think it's perfectly all right. The only thing I don't like is that you can't move while channeling it, and that is quite irritating.
So I brought up on screen, here is the updated leveling path. Those of you that obviously have your Scales of the Earth Warder already leveled up, but for those of you that don't, that want to play a protection warrior, here's a little bit of a update, and I think you'll probably have this by the time that this show is up on YouTube and whatnot. This will be pinned as an updated version. You said it changed a little bit, but just to make sure chat sees this, and then
Yeah, 1 and 2 changed. Previously, you'd go for dragon scales first, but they nerfed dragon scales and they nerfed IP, so Scales of the Earth is definitely the better choice. And there's also the damage component of Scales of the Earth, which makes it really good, when you're running dungeons early on and things like that.
Right, that's fair.
And it's worth noting that.
Oh, go ahead.
It's worth noting that this path is for maximizing survivability and not damage. So you wouldn't take the stamina trait fourth. You'd take the revenge trait fourth instead if you wanted to go for damage. But yeah.
Yeah. But looking at the PTR on the forward, is that this is not totally updated yet on WoWDB, but this is what your Scale of the Earth border looks like now. And again, the artifact power in the left corner chat is not updated, but we are going to going from 54 traits to 71 possible traits in the future. Again, not totally updated, but you do get your new traits on this side. Your current new golden perk is under construction. Check back soon, which is probably the best I've ever seen. It's really, really strong. And all these 3 of 3s here, all these 3 of 3 traits go to 4 of 4. So you have your new Bastion of the Aspects, which gives you increases damage prevented by shield block by 8%, which this is a 4 of 4 trait. All the 3 of 3s on the base weapon can also be moved to 4 of 4 with the new trait system. There are 71 in total. I do believe it's the new max cap from 54 is 71. But again, the artifact power, this is not actually correct. The new artifact power we need to complete your weapon, if you want to factor in the new nonsense of another Paragon trait, is, I do believe, 4.03 billion artifact power with a B, because, math. And the new max artifact knowledge level that's happening in the patch is been looked at to be 400,000% more artifact power from abilities, but from artifact tokens and whatnot. But we'll see as the PTR moves forward. But the Paragon trait goes to a 1 point, right? Right now, our current one goes to 20. But the new one does go to a 1 pointer. I'm just putting 71 in here just so you can see the 71 is the new number. Damn it, the stupid art relic thing. And then you get the new golden circle, which is the protection of the Valajar, where you gain back almost everything from your old Paragon, and a little bit more. Because I think all tanks are gaining a slight boost, because the current Paragon only gives you 29% armor, but you keep the 10%, and then you gain 10% here, so you actually lose some armor, but you're gaining stamina or something. How is this? What have you guys figured out?
I'm sure it's Blizzard's intention that you don't get weaker when the new patch comes out. So
sure,
I'm sure they'll do their best to make sure that doesn't happen.
Right, because it is technically on the PTR now. You do lose armor, which
I think that'll definitely be fixed. That seems
really
weird, I guess, to lose that.
But I wish we could talk about your artifact more. We don't know what your new golden trait is. Is there anything you wanted to note upon Revengeance or the Bastion of the Aspects before we move on to just looking at some items and then closing out? Anything on these? There's kind of...
I just hope that Neltharion's Thunder, whatever it is, it makes Neltharion's Fury not awful to use. That's my wish for the next patch. But
I hope that Neltharion's Fury stays the same way, just because Marok doesn't like it, for no other reason. That's the thing.
Wow. Because you guys don't know... Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say it's gonna be interesting to see how Bastion of the Aspects works exactly, because we don't know if it's additive or multiplicative. For that increase to shield block. Because if it's additive, it's gonna be a really, really strong trait.
Right.
But we'll see.
Yeah, it's definitely hard to tell because these aren't available to test. There's only a test on the PTR. So, and then Revengeance is just that Revenge increases the damage of Revenge by 50%. So the procs of Revenge just do more damage. So it's just a damage increase, which is a substantial damage increase. 50% damage is not a small bonus, at least right now. But we'll see if that...
Yeah, that's going to be really, really good in dungeons, just because of the frequency you get. Revenge procs, you're just going to be doing insane damage.
Okie dokie.
They're going to have to tune that. So.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So this last little bit here is why it's the very last little end bit. I don't know if these are incredibly demonstrative to talk about here. It's the trinkets and legendaries, which we can kind of like fly through here in a minute. I'm looking at, I have Icy Veins brought up to hover over these, but I don't see all your legendaries posted. So again, that's why the Icy Veins one for this is not completely updated yet, sadly. But are there any legendaries or trinkets, let's do legendaries first, that are super, super high value?
Bracers
so
and
the
gloves.
bracers are easily the strongest for survivability by a huge margin. They're ridiculously good. Frankly, I think it's very silly that they're so good, and they're an item that you can't reliably get.
Right.
But they're great. If you have them, you should certainly use them for survivability purposes. The gloves are extremely strong for both survivability and for damage, because they make you get more rage and they make you do a lot more damage. And I mean, that's what there is to it. They're just really good. The tank trinket is deceptively strong for damage because it's like nearly 3,000 strength when it's 940 item level. And on top of that, the on use is really powerful, especially on single target. Similarly, the DPS trinket is obviously really good for DPS, although not as good as the tank trinket on single target. I may be wrong, but I think the tank trinket's on use can crit, in which case you can pair it with Battle Cry, unlike the DPS trinket, which is already guaranteed to be a crit.
Yeah, I'm not sure. That's a good question. I have no idea.
I think it can.
Just talk about the belt for a second. The belt used before 715 wasn't that great. It was okay in dungeons when you could thunderclap a lot of ads, but it was essentially indirectly buffed with 715 because you're casting thunderclap single target now.
Mm.
And if you pair the belt with anger management, you can have incredibly high uptime on demo shout. It's like,
which is particularly good for DPS in dungeons if you're using anger management and booming voice and avatar, like we discussed earlier.
Yeah. So
and
the belt
it also
is
benefit. Sorry.
No, so the belt is just like compared to before, a very good legendary.
It seems very rounded. Yeah.
Particularly because of the anger management buff. Now taking into account demo shout where it didn't before 715, that's also indirectly buffing the belt.
Yeah.
That's fair. Yeah, I mean, it looks like it also feels like it's very obviously using demoralizing shout more often is making that the enemies deal 20% less damage to you for 8 seconds. But then, yeah, if you have anger management and booming voice and the belts, then you get even more demo shout uptime all the time. That seems pretty good. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Something about the legendary ring, the walls fell.
Right.
So often you see people saying, oh, should I take anger management because it makes my shield wall cooldown really low? The answer is no. Having the ring or not having the ring does not affect whether or not you should take anger management. There are situations where you should take anger management. We described them earlier. And those situations remain the same whether or not you have the ring. Someone in Twitch chat just pointed out that demo shout is 12 seconds, not 8, if you have one of the artifact traits, and that is correct.
Well, that's true. Yeah, I'm looking at the base tooltip. You're totally right, though. Yeah, you're right, because you get the demo shout increased duration, so which is right over here. Yeah, rumbling voice, which increases the duration and radius of demo shout by 50%. Yeah, for sure. So that gives you 4 more seconds. Absolutely.
Yeah, in terms of just the ring's strength, it's okay. Like if you have it, you shouldn't feel bad, I guess, but there are better ones.
I mean, the walls fell makes it almost like you would not take anything other than Devastator, though, because you want Shield Slam to reset as much often as you want, like all the time.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
That would definitely help.
Realistically, the point is that Devastator is already a good choice.
Sure,
and honestly,
sure.
It doesn't affect your talent choices. It's just not impactful enough to affect whether or not you should take Devastator or Indomitable, or whether or not you should take anger management or heavy repercussions.
How about anything else, Marok? I was going to bring up Trinkets.
In terms of, like, all the other legendaries are just whatever. Prada's after the change is decent now. The chest is not that great. What else? That's kind of it. Yeah, main things you want are gloves and wrists. So you can talk about trinkets now.
Yeah, I mean, there are trinkets that are up on Icy Veins, but they're not all the newer ones. I don't know if there's anything you want to just to note upon, like super hierarchy of like, if you can get this trinket, then get this trinket, if there's anything off the top of your head that's really important to denote.
Diamond Deck Immortality.
Yeah. Darkmoon deck is really, really good. Arcana Crystal. What else is there?
That's really like Darkmoon Deck Immortality is easily the strongest trinket for survivability in 8 out of 10 fights in Nighthold. The only ones where I would recommend trying to find an alternative are Croesus and Star Augur. And honestly, it's not that bad on Croesus. It's not good, but it's not awful because it still reduces the damage of Slam and his melee hits. So yeah, it's easily the strongest trinket for physical damage, which means it's easily the strongest trinket on 8 out of 10 fights, even though those fights have notable magic damage components.
Okay.
I do have a trinket guide, which is linked in the Warrior Discord in the pins if people are interested in reading that.
I just put it in Twitch chat.
Awesome, yeah. And that'll be in the YouTube description box below as well too. I'll rally that stuff all up. It'll be a nice bit.ly link though, because that's a huge Google document post. But yeah, so,
yeah,
okay.
there's a repo short link for it.
So that's why I didn't want to like drag on about trinkets too long, because we are definitely at time. But that's a really good resource. Go check that out if you are curious about, because trinkets are just weird in this expansion. They're A, so many, B, even more because Mythic Plus brings dungeon trinkets to stay relevant for a long time, and C, there are very diminutive bonuses on lots of them all over the place, like at least for DPS. Like, it's so obnoxious to find out that they're all kind of like whatever the higher eye level is, it's the better one. No, okay, but then what if it's 5 eye levels different?
It's very much the other way around, and the item level barely matters because often, well, Blizzard has no idea what they're doing, or at least they aren't doing it with respect to item level and trinkets. And some trinkets are just clearly ridiculously overpowered compared to others, and that will be the case even if the other trinket is significantly higher item level. So you have time walking trinkets, which are really strong for physical damage, and they're item level 815, and they're still far stronger than many other trinkets at 890 or something. Right.
Well, yeah, so we can do final closing thoughts on Prot Warriors, and you brought up that you want to talk about the Nighthold stuff, about like spell reflection and things about warriors in Nighthold. So there are any, this is like, this is tips, secrets, and suggestion kind of section. So what do you got? What do you got? Is this Marco or Marok? Oh, go.
So yeah, sure, I'll talk about it. So spell reflect with Legion, they added 30% magic damage reduction onto it, which makes it much more useful than it was previously, where it was literally just reflected spells. But the spell reflection component is still there, and that can be really useful in certain situations. So for example, in Neltharian's Lair, you can spell reflect Sunder on the second boss,
right,
and spell reflect the Molten, I think it's called Molten Crash, on the last boss, and just take literally no damage from that. So yeah, spell reflection can be really, really useful, and you just want to be using it anyway for the magic damage DR. So like on Croesus, when you get to high stacks, just pop that and you'll take 30% less damage from the dot.
Yeah. I want to talk about warriors in Nighthold in general, because there's definitely a prevailing attitude that warriors, because they're weak to spell damage, apparently, that means that they're not good in Nighthold, because Nighthold is all magic. So firstly, it's not the case that Nighthold is all magic. There are 2 fights where there's more magic than physical damage in terms of relevant damage.
Right.
That is Croesus and Star Augur. There are plenty of other fights where there's legitimate concerns in terms of heavy spell damage, but warriors deal with them fine, because firstly they have spell reflection, which works very well for magic damage. They have Demo Shout, Last Stand, and Shield Wall, all of which work very well for magic damage. They have external cooldowns, all of which work very well for magic damage, and if you're not using them, that is your fault. Use them, or your raid leader's fault anyway. And lastly, they have Ignore Pain, and Ignore Pain works for magic damage, and you can't just ignore that. And whilst it's true that it's often not enough on its own, that doesn't mean it doesn't work. And people really ignore that. They say, well, warriors just mitigate physical damage. Well, that's not true. And whilst it's true that maybe warriors could use a buff in terms of dealing with certain fights, they're not very good on Croesus, and they're not very good on Star Augur. That doesn't mean they're awful, it just means they're not necessarily the best option. And you will do fine on those fights, especially in non-mythic, if you try hard. And maybe that means demanding of you more than it ought to demand of you, but you can still do it if you play the class well.
Yeah, no, there's definitely... I think a lot of it mostly comes down to the prevalent notion of that Stagger and Brewmasters are just, like, good at everything right now, and Guardian Druids, in the same vein, take very, very, very little physical damage on the most part because of how ridiculously powerful Ironfur is and how you can keep up 2 stacks for almost forever, and they have more HP. So that's the problem. I mean, we see that from the top guilds, which I'll talk about this on the show next week with Exorcist, I'm sure, is that because Alviona, the GM of Exorcist, played Prot Warrior for Nightmare and TOV, but then, he's not anymore. I wonder why. There's something there. But that's obviously the world first race, which is very different than most other people's progression. So, but there is something to be taken care of in that. I think a lot of it comes down to, too, is that certain tanks in Legion, which we kind of brushed over earlier, certain tanks in Legion now definitely excel better depending on what healers you have in your group. Like, a Brewmaster Monk would love HOTS to counteract Stagger. So Restoration Druid, Mistweaver Monk, right? Lots of heals over time counteract Stagger, whereas other tanks are just different in how they take damage, and different healers heal that differently, so...
Yeah, that's true to a certain extent. Like, Holy Paladins are really good for warriors, just for the burst healing. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, let's just catch up with the chat. Yeah, all but a Prot Warrior on Gul'dan. Yeah. Well, we're talking about the world first race here. It's different, but we'll go over that. That's a topic for next week. But is there... It's just a misnomer, I think. It's a misunderstanding, probably. Because whenever the trickle-down information comes from those top guilds and those world first kills, we see what WoW Progress says, and like, oh, they're not using X and Y and Z tanks. Why is that?
But they also had several examples of classes where they had multiple of the same spec, and there were many specs that they didn't have, and that doesn't mean that those specs aren't viable, even if they're in the lower half of specs for DPS on that kind of encounter or in general.
Yeah.
The fact, if they bring, I don't know, 3 Arms Warriors or something, or 3 Fury Warriors, whatever, that doesn't mean that other classes are not good. It just means that they're not as good. And it's true that warriors are not as good at dealing with magic damage than Guardian Druids. I think we can probably say that that's the case. But that doesn't mean they're not good enough to do Nighthold.
Yeah, of course not.
Yep.
It just depends. This is just a thing that the community sees, that if X and Y and Z, these top guilds, do it, then they have to also as well, which is just not true. They fight the patch and, in a way, the flavor of the week on what is the strongest they have at their disposal to tackle the encounters that are most of the time. I mean, we've seen Star Augur has gotten a little bit tweaked in damage. Spellblade got tweaked in damage, right? Like, there have been these things that they're like, oh, well, it's a little too hard maybe, but the top guilds have to push through that with what they have available to them. So with all their splits and whatnot, they have to put eggs in all of, like, the Havoc, Demon Hunter, Fury Warrior basket for DPS, for example, or it used to be the Shadow Priest basket, but they're still fine. But it's just difference. But I think that'll do it. Normally we would have some time for Twitch chat, but we've kind of weaved in Twitch chat the whole show. So unless you guys have anything else that's super on the nose you wanted to bring up, I think it's wrap time. You both good? I see you crossing off stuff on your list. Yeah.
I think we talked about basically everything we want to talk about. So yeah.
All right, then it's time for me to hit this button. Oh, there's the audio pop. Why was that there? No! Well, thank you all very much for tuning into episode number 128 of Final Boss TV for Legion Protection Warriors. Again, next week will be the Exorcist show. More details on the guests for that show, and of course the world first shirt that will be coming out as well. Sort of just like, I like making them going forward because it sort of like timestamps those parts in our little timeline. That's why we have the ones going forward. But again, around the corner for the guests, there's Macro. You can go bother him on Discord at Macro. Is it Macrologia, right?
Yeah.
You probably say it better than I do. Give the chat. How do you say it?
Macrologia.
There you go. Fair enough. You can go bother him on Discord. And as a note, I always make sure, like, if I'm gonna plug Discord, please be respectful of the time of these people. Don't just bother them all the time. Check the pins, check the FAQ section, check the guideposts. But if you can't find anything, then make sure to ask Macro about what kind of cupcakes he likes, right?
Yeah, Macro loves his cupcakes.
I do like cupcakes. In fact, one of the officers in our guild is his nickname is Cupcake. So yeah.
Fair enough. Well, thank you for all the time, sir. The knowledge bombs you dropped were great. I appreciate all of your time on the show today. And there's Marok. You can follow him and go watch him on his live streams at X Marok, because he is a 14-year-old girl, apparently.
Marok was taken. Sorry. Couldn't think of anything else.
That's totally fine. At least it's not like capital X, lowercase x, Marok, capital lowercase, or whatever. It's fine.
It's not an Xbox gamer tag, don't worry.
Right, right. But thank you very much for your time and knowledge on the show today as well, sir. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yep, thanks for having me. If anyone wants to, have a place to talk about warrior-related stuff, you can go to the Warrior Discord, discord.gg/skyhold. I want to give a shout out to the hunter in my guild, BMG. You suck.
Wow.
And yeah, thanks for having me. Had fun.
Yeah, and again, as well, the link to the Skyhold is right there in the channel guide. You can click right here. I have a Final Boss TV link as well, too, but that's always for all the different Discords, so you can go grab that if you need a link. But
discord.gg/skyhold.
Yeah, that also works, too. You have a vanity link. Yeah.
Yeah, we got partnered about a week ago. Pretty cool. Yeah.
That's very, very good. Well, thank you very much to the guests on the show today. Again, next week it'll be Exorcist. Not sure who's on that show specifically yet. And the Sunday or two after that will be the sit down with the brilliant minds editing, storytelling behind the oh my god, the Lost Codex YouTube website, YouTube site, YouTube group. There's only 2 of them that do everything for the Lost Codex. And we're going to talk to them, a little community spotlight, and then we'll go from there. I'm going to be putting up a poll on Twitter to vote. You can vote on the next specs in order. So whatever wins, like 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, it'll be that order of specs. So go check that out. I'll have that on Twitter later. It'll be in the video description box below if you're watching this on YouTube. As well, if you missed the live show, of course, you can watch this on YouTube as an entire VOD. It'll be cut, it'll be posted. And then we're also, you can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play Radio, Google Play Music, as an audio only. And if you want more podcasts and more Warrior discussion, then maybe be sure to check out the BTS Patreon only podcast on Patreon. But I will see you all next week. Trust in your Seal of Artifact power, as it's about all it's good for nowadays. And until next week, everybody. Bye!
See ya.
Bye, bye. Wave bye. Wave bye at the nice people. Wait.
I would wave, but no one can see me.
That's true. No one can see you.